Jesse had gone to pay his respects. An old college friend had died, and he traveled through East Texas to pay his respects. And it was on his way home when he pulled off what he thought was a service road. He followed the road until it dead-ended, and then he found himself driving on an unpaved area into the woods. Knowing that he was lost, he got out of his SUV and he began to wander around to see if he could get his bearings. As he wandered through the grass and through the brush, Jesse fell. He got up and he continued to walk, and he fell again, and he got up and he fell again. And finally, he just figured out he couldn't even see his SUV anymore. So he wandered around trying to find his way back when again he fell, and he didn't have the strength to get up. After all, Jesse was 77. He lay there through the night, and the next morning, he said, when the sun rose, everything looked a lot different. He discovered that he really was in a wooded area and was unaware that he was only about 150 feet away from his SUV, only about 50 yards. But the trees were so thick, he couldn't see it. He was still unable to get up, so he began to scream, hoping somebody would hear him, because he could hear the cars up on the interstate at I-20. Every day he was lost. Every day would be Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. He screamed for help, hoping somebody would hear him, and nobody did. And he thought, this is it. This is how it's supposed to be. This is a place that I will die. Lay there in his shiny black shoes, the black trousers that he had worn, unable to rescue himself. On Sunday, it did rain, and he was able to drink water while it rained. It said that helped him to survive a little bit. But beyond that, he said, the stars were my blanket at night. That kind of gave me comfort, gave me some hope, but it kept me from losing faith. On Wednesday, a couple of bicyclists were riding the trails around the lake, and they happened to notice an SUV sitting off that looked like it didn't belong there. And so they got the license tag, and they called the police. The police did the research, and they said, yes, that SUV belongs to Jesse Stevens, and he's been missing for a couple of days. So they dispatched officers to the area. The first one to arrive was Officer Doherty. He saw the SUV, examined it, and he took off into the woods when he spotted a metal building with the body laying next to it. Fearing the worst, he ran to the body, and when he saw Jesse, Jesse looked up at him and said, boy, am I glad you're here. Of course, they called in other officers. They managed to get Jesse to Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, where he made a full recovery and was joined together again with his family and friends. Now, friends, that's a good story, but it's really not unique. Truth is, people get lost all the time. How often do you watch the news or read the paper and there's a story about somebody that's gotten lost? Maybe it's a senior adult like Jesse was. Perhaps it's even a child that has wandered away from home. But we hear stories about people getting lost all the time. One of my favorite TV shows to watch is this TV show called Dual Survival. How many of y'all just don't watch the right channels, okay? Dual Survival. And the way they set it up is these two guys are trying to survive, but they're always saying, they were riding an SUV in the mountains and they got lost, or they were on a ski trip and they got off the trail and they got lost. And it tells you how you should survive. If they didn't survive, they'd have to name the show something else, right? Okay? So, but people get lost all the time. How terrible it would be to get lost and not have anybody come looking for you. That seems to be part of what Jesus is trying to say when he teaches through some parables that we find recorded in the 15th chapter of Luke. And Jesus uses the term lost. Now, before I get to that, I want to say something about that term, the lost. My whole life, probably most of your whole lives, when people talk about people that don't go to church or they talk about people that don't have a relationship with Christ, they refer to them as the lost. They're lost in sin, whatever. I just want to say that if you know somebody and you're talking to your friends and you say, Rich Schneider, he's lost. You don't go up to Rich and say, Rich, my brother, I think you're lost. He's probably not going to receive that too well. When we say the lost, we're not talking about a pejorative term. We're not trying to slam anybody, not trying to put anybody down. It's actually just a phrase that Jesus used when he talked about people that were disconnected from God, that they were lost. They had not yet found their way. But when we think of talking to people today, if we were to tell somebody, I think you're lost, they probably would not respond well. It reminds me of the scene from the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Maybe y'all remember this scene. I would show the clip, but the language wasn't exactly family friendly, you understand? But if you've seen the movie, the three guys escape from prison and they're driving out in the country when all of a sudden they see this guy standing alone with a guitar. And so they go over and they pick the guy up and they're all riding and they ask him, what were you doing standing out here in the middle of nowhere? And that's when he says, last night I sold my soul to the devil. Y'all remember this scene if you've seen the movie? Sold my soul to the devil because the devil's going to give him the ability to play guitar. And George Clooney his character's driving the car, and he said, well, that's just the dangest thing. You sold your soul to the devil, and yesterday Pete and Delmar got baptized and saved, and I guess I'm the only one that remains unaffiliated. I think that's how people that are lost like to think of themselves. Unaffiliated, right? We know the largest, the most rapidly growing sector of religious life in America. You know who they are? The unaffiliated. People that don't connect with the community of faith now outnumber those that do. But Jesus called them lost. And so for the remainder of this series, if you will just allow me to use that term, again, realizing I'm not trying to put anybody down, but I think it's apt because people get lost all the time. And Jesus said, when he talked about his mission, he said, the Son of Man came to seek and save those who were lost. And if we would be disciples of Christ, if we would share in Jesus' mission, then we are instruments that he used in the seeking, saving work that Jesus is trying to accomplish. And this is work that he lays out for us in Luke chapter 15. 3 parables he tells about how people get lost and what we could learn from it. So today we're just going to look at the first one of these parables, the parable of the lost sheep. If you would give your attention to the reading from the Gospel of Luke. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Brothers and sisters, this is the word of the Lord. I do not claim to know a lot about sheep. What I know about sheep, I learned as a small child living in a rural country. I've spent some time around sheep, and I've learned stuff from reading and just, watching you learn things, right? When I think of sheep, the first thing that I know about sheep is this. Sheep are not the most intelligent animals in the world. I do not know who came up with the first sheep intelligence test, but ever since they did that and they began to test sheep intelligence, it always comes back the same. Sheep do not rank high on the genius scale. You understand what I'm saying? Sheep are dumb. That's the first thing I think of when I think of sheep. And the second thing I think of is how sheep get lost. Shepherd takes the sheep out into the pasture so they can be fed, and the sheep just puts its head down, finds a tuft of grass, and it begins to eat that grass until basically there's no more grass left to eat. And when it's done with that one, it goes to the next tuft of grass. And a sheep will just go from grass to grass until it gets full, and then it will look up, having paid no attention to its surroundings, and the sheep is lost. It's careless. It hasn't paid attention. Now, when a sheep gets lost because it lacks in the intelligent quotient, it doesn't try to find its way back. It just sits down and begins to cry the way Jesse could no longer get up, and he cried out for somebody to come and rescue him. The hope of the sheep is that the shepherd will hear it crying and the shepherd will come get it. And so this is a story Jesus tells, is about a sheep that got lost. But of course we know Jesus isn't really talking about sheep, is he? Jesus is talking about people. And he's talking about how it is that people of faith get lost in the world. How it is that through our own carelessness, we just kind of wander around, not paying attention to what's going on around us until we end up lost. That was Hillary's story. Hillary was a college student of mine when I did campus ministry. That's not her real name, but Hillary, when she graduated from high school, she wasn't exactly sure where she wanted to go to college. And then when she's trying to make that decision, just something terrible happened in her life. Hillary's father had always battled depression, and he lost his battle with depression when he decided he would take his own life. And literally, she had no idea what to do. Her uncle happened to be a United Methodist pastor. He had actually been the campus minister at East Central whenever they built that building. He was my district superintendent that said, we want you to go to East Central and do campus ministry. And so her uncle began to say, at East Central there's a student ministry, and here's what they do and here's what they accomplish, and I think it can help you if you'll go and be a part of that. And she liked the sound of that, and so she made her decision to go to East Central based on our ministry. She got involved. She was smart. She was just one of those active young people, and we thought, wow, she's really going to be a good leader for us in ministry. But we didn't really understand all that was going on inside of her heart. Even though she was very fulfilled at the ministry, it wasn't enough. We had some women that were involved in a sorority, and she talked to them about it, and she decided to pledge that sorority and became a member, and that still wasn't enough. And she saw a poster on campus saying that they were having tryouts for cheerleaders because they wanted more cheerleaders. And so she tried out and she became a cheerleader. You've noticed before, haven't you, where you can see what's going on in a person's life with much greater clarity than they can see it? And we could all see what was happening in Hillary's life. She was looking for something, and so she would push and push and push until she hit the wall, and she would crash, and she would regroup, and she would push and push and push until she hit the wall and crashed. And that was going on through her whole first year of college. But by the end of that first year, she had figured it out. I can't do everything. I can't do all that I'm doing. Something's got to change. Something has to go. And she made the decision that what would go would be her involvement in the campus ministry. Now, we reached out to her. We continue to say, hey, we know you're busy and stuff. We just come and be a part of what we're doing. We find that whenever we're involved in this ministry, somehow it does connect our lives with God, and that's a good thing, and we know it's been good for you. And finally, she just basically said, don't bother me anymore. And so we didn't. We continued to be friendly. We continued to let people know, but we didn't pressure her. We didn't want her coming because of that. And so for the next 2.5 years, she was no longer involved in ministry. And then came her last semester of college. She walked into my office one day, and you could tell by the look in her eyes, the tone of her voice, her body language. We made a little chit-chat, and then she asked me the question she wanted to ask me. She said, would it be okay if I started coming back again? Now, brothers and sisters, I'm going to tell you, I thought that was an absurd question. We never wanted her to wander away in the first place. We always, had tried to maintain that relationship. All we wanted was the best for her and for her to connect her life with what God was wanting to use her for. From my perspective, it was an absurd question. I said, we would love to have you come back. We'd just be excited if you came back. We think it'd be good for us. We think it would be good for you. Come on back. You know when we're here. But when I thought about it later, what I thought was an absurd question, she did not. She thought it was a very important question. And what she was asking was not, can I come back and be involved in the campus ministry? What she was asking was, if I come back, will God accept me? Because she admitted, I have turned away. I have walked away from God. I got so involved in other things that I actually believed I could still stay connected to God even when I wasn't paying attention to Him anymore. And this is what Jesus is trying to teach these Pharisees and these people that says Jesus is eating with sinners. So Jesus uses a different term. He talks about the lost. We all get lost. We all lose our way. But how terrible it would be if nobody was looking for us. Yeah, think about it for just a moment. How is it that people that are part of the community of faith, how is it that sheep in the flock get lost through their own carelessness? If we had time, I'm sure everybody would have an answer for that, either based on your own experience or based on the experience of some relationship you have with someone that you would, if you talk to them, say, are you unaffiliated? Let me give you a couple of examples because we don't have time for all of us to share. One of the things that I know, once I really got connected in church, I'll be honest, there was never a time in my life when the church wasn't a priority once I made that decision. And when I got in college, I coached women's fast-pitch softball. We had a good team. We traveled a lot. We went to the national tournament. We did very well. And we always qualified for Sundays when we played in tournaments. That meant we were competing for the championship. And so it was that last year I coached, every tournament we played in, didn't matter if it was in Topeka or Wichita or Irving or wherever we played, we always qualified for Sunday play. So you know what that meant, right? If I'm coaching softball, what am I not doing on Sunday? Not going to church. And that was one of the reasons I decided not to coach softball anymore, is because I didn't like that it was always pulling me away from something that was a priority in my life. How many people do we know that have kids and grandkids that are involved in athletics, and they miss a lot because of their athletics? Bennett kids are in that category. If y'all are new and you think, man, he's really laying it on. No, Bennett kids are in this category. All my kids are athletes. All of my kids have to make choices whether they will compete on Sunday or if they will go to church. Now, when they were really young, they didn't get that choice. We made it for them. But as they got older, we want them to know you have to make a choice. One of the proudest moments I had this last year was when my son Jonathan, he's in the back, don't turn around and look, okay? You'll embarrass him. He doesn't know I'm going to say this. I didn't ask his permission. But one of the proudest moments I had was when we talked about baseball. He had just gone through confirmation where we told him, this is what we expect of members. And we said, you got a game at this time. What are you going to do? And he said, I'll get up and I'll go to church at 8:15. Jonathan's not exactly a morning person. But he came, and if you were here in that 8:15 service, well, y'all weren't here in that 8:15 service. But if you had been, you would have seen him sitting on the front row in his baseball uniform. And there are other kids from other families that worship here at St. Andrews that they're active and they come and they wear their uniforms because we're trying to help them understand you have to make choices, but somehow a relationship with Christ ought to be a priority in the midst of that. And for others, they get lost because they just get so involved in that, and then they might get embarrassed that, gosh, church just isn't going to accept me because they don't think my priorities are right. That's not it at all. To be a part of what Jesus is doing is to be a part of the seeking, saving work that he would do. A shepherd looking for the sheep. Let me give you another example. Y'all can probably say, oh yeah, I know somebody this has happened to. Somebody misses, they're pretty regular in church, but they miss a Sunday because they have to go out of town for a wedding, right? Family members get married, go out of town, they're with them. And then next Sunday, they really plan on being back in church, but they wake up and they're sick. And migraine, headache, stomach, something going on. So they miss church again. The following Sunday, they can't come because they had promised this family who asked them over and over, would you come to the lake and join us for one weekend? They finally made the commitment. And so now they're going to the lake, and then the next week it rains. Y'all know how this works, right? It's not that they ever intended to say, God, I don't want anything to do with you. But sometimes through carelessness, sheep wander away from the flock. And if that's ever been you in your life, you know what it took to get you to make the decision to rejoin the flock. And I don't think it just happened on accident. It's bad enough to be lost, but it's worse to be lost when nobody's looking for you. And Jesus says the reason the shepherd goes and looks for the sheep is because he loves that sheep. And loving shepherds search for lost sheep. See, when Hillary came back to our campus ministry and she told me I'll be there on Wednesday night, I have to confess, campus ministry had turned me into a little bit of a skeptic because I'd invited a number of students that promised me they would be there that never showed up. I think they may have just told me that because they knew it'd be kind of a conversation ender and they didn't have to deal with me anymore. But she said, I'm going to be here Wednesday night. And she did. She showed up Wednesday night, and she'd been there for a couple of months, and it was great. Everybody just received her back. Nobody put her down. Nobody criticized her. We're just glad you're back. And then she came in one day, and she asked me, are we going to have senior night this semester? Now, we had two different types of senior night. The first was our last worship of the year when we invited our seniors that were graduating to lead us in what we did. We wanted to give them that opportunity to share with us. But the other senior night was we would invite high school seniors from the area to come to the ministry so they could experience what it would be like to be part of a Christian community once they stepped on campus, no matter where they went. And that was the one she was talking about. She said, are we having senior night? I said, yes, we are, and this is when we're having it. And she said, I know that the leaders are the ones that speak that night, but I wondered if I could tell my story. I said, well, why don't you tell me your story, and then I'll know. And she told me her story, and I said, Hillary, that's exactly what students need to hear when they come here. And so she stood before that group of high school seniors, and she told them, she said, when I came to college, I was looking for something. And I came to this ministry, and I got involved, but it wasn't satisfying everything within me, and I began to look in other places, and nothing ever satisfied. And so I kind of walked away from everything. She goes, I walked away from this ministry. She goes, but what I want you to know tonight is when I walked away from this ministry, God never quit caring about me. And God continued to work on my heart, and God was the one that used these people to say, we want you to be a part of what we're doing. I don't know what kind of impact it had on any of those high school seniors that night, but I do know it had an impact on her, and it had an impact on us. Let me ask you, friends, who is somebody you know that goes to a small group, or they used to go to your Sunday school class? Maybe they don't even come to St. Andrews. Maybe they go to church somewhere else. But if you were to use that definition of someone that's become disconnected from the community of faith, that they are like a lost sheep that has wandered away, who do you know? And then the question becomes, how will God use you as an instrument of his seeking and saving work to help that person find their way back home? Perhaps the first thing you need to do is not, hear me clearly, this is dangerous. Perhaps the first thing you need to do is not to invite them to come to church. Perhaps the first thing you need to do is just to connect with them so you can help them know how it is that God has not given up on them. And maybe you invite them to church. Maybe you invite them to come to midweek. Just remember that their own level of involvement will probably not exceed your own. How would God use us to seek and save those who are lost? Isn't that the mission that God has given us? Because once we were lost, but now we believe we've been found by a shepherd who loves us. And one of the ways that we remember that, one of the ways we celebrate that is when we come to the Lord's table. This is not the table of the United Methodist Church. It's not the table of St. Andrews. This is the Lord's table. And we believe that Christ invites all. So the invitation we give in the name of Christ is this. If you truly and earnestly repent of your sins, and you intend to lead a new life following the will and the ways of God, then draw near by faith and receive this sacrament to yourself. And as we come, we want to declare together what it is that we as a people of faith believe. So as you're able, let me invite you to stand where you are, and would you join me in this affirmation of faith?